What's the craziest reason someone you work with was fired? Made false police report about assault. She was a big girl, and our manager was a big guy. She had bent over to stock up our fry containers under the fry station, and he needed to pass her, but the space was fairly narrow to begin with. He let her know he was going to pass her, turned sideways, and held his hands up by his shoulders as he passed, with a polite, "Excuse me, I saw this because I needed to pass her as well." For some reason, she decided to call 911 and say he had groped her as he went by, which was physically impossible. He was scared to death, and I promised to vouch for him, which I did, but more importantly, the cameras did too. She was arrested for filing a false report. Story 2. A coworker got fired indirectly for giving 2 weeks' notice. All his shifts were reassigned in a couple of days. Duly noted, when I quit, it was by phone after the last shift I chose to work. Same supervisor, smile. Story 3. I worked with a young woman who was pregnant and went on leave to have her baby. After 2 weeks, she said she needed to come back because she needed the money. She got doctor's clearance, and they let her come back. Well, her first day back, she found the truck keys of a coworker in the employee break room. He left them in his gym bag instead of his locker because this was his second job and he had to change when he got there. But the bag didn't fit in the locker, so he just threw it on top of the lockers. She ended up stealing this man's truck. Everyone assumed an ex-employee with the door code must have gotten in and stole them. A couple days later, she comes in with her baby and baby daddy to buy some diapers and stuff. She goes through the line of the guy she stole from and tries using his credit card to buy her stuff. This man was looking at his own card and knew instantly this was who stole his truck. Wallet was in the truck. He alerts the manager by asking for an override, and the police showed up really quick. Of course, she also drove dude's truck up there because she clearly is the world's dumbest criminal. When the police get there, they find a substance in the center console and they take away mom, dad, and baby. Needless to say, she was fired. Story 4. Boning a coworker. At work. During business hours. At their desks. In front of a gigantic window facing a busy street. Both of them were married to other people. Story 5. At my first job, newly hired lab tech calls out sick one day during his second week of work. Somehow heard that there was free pizza during lunch. Comes into work during lunch perfectly fine. Eats a couple of slices joking around with rest of staff, and then goes home. Was asked not to come back. Story 6. Crafting in the garbage can in the bathroom repeatedly. So we hired this new lady and soon after started having a bizarre problem. The garbage can in the staff women's bathroom kept getting moved next to the toilet, and the bathroom stank. After a bit, it got noticed for the first time that there was a full-on fecal log in that garbage can, which was the source of the smell. Now, this was in an assisted living facility with a memory care ward, so it was gross, but entirely possible it was either a resident who got back there or something like a resident assistant very incorrectly cleaning up a mess left by a resident. So we left like a reminder not to throw things like that into the normal garbage. Are a few biohazardous waste cans, anything with blood or feces should go in. It didn't happen again for a bit, so we thought it was resolved. Nope, it happened again, and then we had to solve the mystery of the phantom crafter. Long story short, we eventually traced it back to one of our new servers. She has been going into the bathroom, dragging the can over by the toilet in order to literally sit on the can, feet on the toilet lid, and crap directly in the garbage. She was already a little tightly wound and rather strange, but we didn't think it was this level of crazy. Boy, that mask came off quick when she was talked to, and it went from a "what the absolute duck" meeting to a "you can leave now or we're calling the police" one, as she lost her damn mind. Screaming and throwing things around the office, storming back and forth, getting red-faced. I feel bad, lady needed help, but we weren't in a position to provide it. And if she was doing things like that, I don't think we can trust her hygiene to work in food service, especially for people with compromised immune systems. Story 7. Restaurant job. One of the cooks was going into a customer's single-occupant bathroom on busy nights and pleasuring himself without locking the door. He got walked in on by guests 3 separate times before he was fired. Every time a complaint was made. First time was, "Dude, WTF, lock the door at least. But also, this is not the time or place, so cut it out." Second time was, "We talked about this." Third time was, "Welp, you're clearly a perv and doing this on purpose, so time to go." 2. A brewery job. Regional production brewery with a tasting room, multi-state distribution, pretty well known within craft beer circles. Not a tiny local place. Most of us had keys. Dude working on the packaging line organized a house party that started after hours in the tasting room. Invited a boatload of people, brought in a DJ who set up their own wild. Drank from the taps for hours overnight. Cleaned it all up before M start, and no one had a clue. Until folks posted photos on social media and tagged him, which showed up on other employees' feeds he was friends with, and it got back to the higher-ups. Gotta say, this one was a baller move, and props to him for a good cleanup. Story 8. Worked with an absolute wreckhead when I was 21. small local shop that most people worked in during college. I was in my final year and he was just starting. I knew his older sister from school. He told me that he was moving into a house for college and they were having a party. I was polite, but I wasn't going to it. I was talking to some of the guys who worked at the back store and found out he wasn't moving into that house. He was still living at home. We live fairly close to the main colleges in the area. Found out some other small lies he told the till girls and told the store lads something else. Fast forward a few weeks, and I hate if I'm scheduled on with him. Everything he says is a lie, basically. Came in one day and told us in detail about how he had a substances-filled night with his buddies. I could have gone to the police. He told me so many details. He also had a habit of not showing up for his shifts after obvious college nights out. Like not even calling in ahead to say he was sick, just not showing up and leaving me and the night manager in the lurch to do all his jobs as well as our own. He sat on the till one day and I just stared at him like, I'm going to see if your brain cells talk to each other and tell you to get down. My sister only knows him as the boy who served her with a pen stuck in his mouth. I had left at this stage, but a coworker told me the goss. He was friends with a manager, so that's how he got the job, basically. He didn't show up for his shift after St. Patrick's Day, and the store manager told him he'd need a doctor's note this time. He got a bullcrap one, and the manager took it. This dummy went on Twitter then and said, "My stupid manager took my DOS doctor's note. I had a massive hangover." Someone saw it, screenshotted it, and sent it to said manager. The manager then wanted him to come in so he could fire him face to face. They kept missing each other. This kid walks in during the day like nothing is happening. He's not working, just getting something to eat. Well, he walked right into the store owner. That guy's a piece of work. Don't start me, but the one thing he has is no public shame. The owner knew what was going on, and he opened up and ate this boy in the fruit and veg section, in front of everyone and their mother. I wish I was there. It's karma at its best. Story 9. Job I had about 15-20 years ago. My supervisor let me know about someone that had been fired not too long before. Apparently a guy I had been hired to replace had a drinking problem, without the actual drinking. Every day he would come in, sit in his cubicle and do his work. Didn't stop to take lunch, worked through it, or drink anything other than from the drinking fountain. But somehow, by the end of the day, he was always drunk. They thought he had hidden some alcohol in the ceiling above one of the toilets or somehow made a secret compartment in his desk drawers. But they could find nothing. Finally, they had someone sit and watch the guy. Turned out he just sat there working and slowly peeling and eating a great big navel orange. Yeah, they finally caught on that he'd been injecting vodka into the oranges, like with an actual needle. So it seemed perfectly normal, but the juice was completely alcoholic. Once they figured it out, he was immediately walked. Story 10. Stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from the company. The department head did this, and our department was in charge of catching employees stealing. What a mess he made, and completely annihilated the integrity of our whole team. Story 11. I got fired after a long series of escalations between some of my workers and some local high school students. My coworkers were feuding with them, and one of my assistant managers so hated them that she pretty much demanded everyone participate in their high school style feud, which I steadfastly refused to do beyond when explicitly ordered to do something or when forced to follow policy, even when those policies were specifically put in place to cater to this feud. In one such event, I made the mistake of letting one of them use the bathroom. The policy had been that the bathrooms were customer only, and when the kids had been asked if they'd bought something, they'd said yes, and my coworker still refused them. I didn't like that, so I followed policy and let them in, and my assistant manager stormed up and full-on screamed in my face in front of other customers about it. She then went into the back and called my manager up to chew me out about it. Her excuse was that I hadn't checked for receipts. Never mind that my other coworker also hadn't. And then my manager sided with the assistant manager. I assumed to keep from undermining the authority of her assistant manager and said that we had to follow policy, no exceptions. I kid you not, the very next morning, she herself broke policy by giving some elderly folks the password to the bathroom. And when I pointed out that that went against policy, she said we had to use common sense at times. That was really infuriating anyhow, so I got caught in the middle of this huge feud and eventually straight up had a bottle of urine thrown at me after a different coworker shouted at the kids. I'm mostly glossing over the stuff the kids did because anything bad any of them did got them rightfully banned. And as a result, that specific person got a just punishment, but the rest of them kept getting targeted despite having done nothing. So I still mostly blame my coworkers. The police ended up getting called, though not by me, and that was a rather common occurrence. Not that they continued showing up after the umpteenth time, and I finally snapped. I asked for an exemption to the policies intended to perpetuate this feud and ended up fired momentarily thereafter. Story 12. First day pill. Madison pulled out a gallon Ziploc with 3 inches high full of pills trying to sell them. I said not for me, but our boss is a big addict. That dumb duck believed me, and they got fired. Story 13. I worked with a guy who figured out that the website that was used to log everyone's time could be accessed on any computer. He would clock in from home at 7 o'clock, mosey into the office at 10 and leave a few hours later, and clock out sometime after that. This is not a good idea when you work in an open office environment and everyone can see if and when you're physically present. Story 14. I had to fire a girl who would reprint the receipt, tell the customer the original didn't print right, then give them the second copy. After the customer left, she would pocket the original receipt. Then she would pocket one or two of the same items before her shift ended and give their friend or family member the original receipt. A few days later, the friend or family member would come in and return the item. They would split the money later. It was only orders paid with cash, so no card had to be presented. When I ran my report for the quarter, our returns were insane, so I got to digging. This girl was doing a return every single shift, 4 to 5 times a week. Normally, we had a return once a week and nothing big, maybe an outfit here or there, and usually it was an exchange, a special stuffed animal store. You can figure it out. These added up to about 3,200. So I ran the report for the original transactions of the returns and saw that she was the cashier on every single one and reprinted a receipt every time it was a cash transaction. Well, most of our sales were attached to a rewards account. So I called each customer and asked if they returned something. Nope, sure didn't. So not only did she steal $3,200, these customers lost rewards points for those items as well. So I had to go credit each account via corporate with their proper rewards plus some and print all the evidence. It took me 2 ducking days. Our regional manager came from out of state, and we showed her the paperwork and asked her if she did this. She looked the boss dead in the eye and said, "Yep." When she told her she was fired and was going to have to be escorted off of mall property by security and was banned from the mall, all she said was, "Damn, for real? Ducking Karen killed my near-perfect stats and cost me my bonus." Story 15. We had a guy that was a supervisor, leave for several months, comes back and gets rehired at the bottom of the totem pole, and at the end of his first week back, he attempted to steal all the payroll checks for the entire depth. And because the value of the checks was high enough, he got slapped with felony grand larceny. We had an operator get caught his foreman-induced substances in his actual workspace, right out in the open. Dude didn't even go to the bathroom for some privacy. He just chopped up a line right there on his gauge table. Had a shift supervisor got fired after they caught on that he was selling overtime. He made a deal with guys that he'd put them in for OT that they actually didn't work, and would them split the proceeds 50-50 each Friday morning when all of us third shifters would go get a couple beers for the end of the week. When I saw all the money changing hands between several coworkers and the foreman, I actually assumed he was selling weed and pills to the guys. Turns out I was wrong. Had one longtime machine operator that was seen as problematic because he was 100% by the book, and he literally had his employee handbook spiral bound and kept it in its own drawer in his toolbox. Well, I actually saw a foreman doing something in that guy's setup and pushing buttons on the CNC controller. Then, lo and behold, quality finds a bunch of bad parts and trace it back to that operator, and he gets a 5-day suspension when he comes in for his shift. And that just so happens to put him 1 point over on the attendance policy. So he gets fired after the 5-day suspension. Story 16. Coming to work looking ugly. This was about 15 years ago. So, to explain, we were bartenders at a high-volume nightclub known for having hot bartenders and waitstaff. One girl just decided she wanted to stop wearing makeup and would also have her hair up with a claw clip. At first, management made a couple of indirect and half-joking comments about her stepping it up. Then they straight out told her she needs to work on her appearance. She stood her ground, saying she was dressed appropriately according to dress code, but she didn't want to wear makeup because her skin was very sensitive and it was too hot to have her hair down, so it was easier to have it up, and she just wanted to be comfortable to do her job. Now, one thing we all, both against the law and company policy, did was drink behind the bar. We all had customers buying us drinks or wanting us to take shots with them, and we had to be sneaky about it because we were not allowed to. Well, one night, they busted out the old breathalyzer and said everyone was going to get tested. And since there was a zero-tolerance policy, anyone caught drinking would be fired. One by one, everyone went into the office to blow into the damn thing, and they had a list written out with everyone's name and next to everybody's name. They were writing 0.0, which was total bullcrap. I was drinking that night. There was no way I would have blown a 0. Anyway, they were after that girl, so they got to her and she was in there a long time and finally came out crying. So they couldn't technically fire her for being ugly, so they fired her for being drunk. Story 17. Our after-hours janitor walked up to my desk after work while I was helping someone else at their desk. I looked over and he had picked up homemade cookies from my desk and started eating them. I asked him why he was taking things off my desk. He made up a lame excuse. He was later moved to another building after he was caught taking cases of free drinks from our break room. There was soda for employees, and he was free to take one, but every night he took a case home with him, caught on camera. I changed jobs, and then one day, I see him walking into my new company's office at 6 p.m. Story 18. Attempted assault. This hot-headed electrician dude on my team was working with someone who kept winding him up intentionally. The foreman was amused by it and didn't do anything about it. The other guy was on one knee installing a receptacle box for a plug and was being a smart-ass to the hothead. Then he noticed a shadow moving on the wall studs in front of him, and as he turned around to see what it was, the hothead was swinging a 3/4-inch conduit bender at his head. He moved just in time and the bender hit the studs instead of his face. Then the guy chased him around the job site with the bender screaming that he was gonna ducking hit him. He was restrained until he calmed down, and then he was thrown off the job site and fired on the spot. Then the aftermath. Everyone was saying the smartass should be fired too, because he wouldn't stop with his bullcrap, and some felt he would have deserved to have his head caved in. I thought a punch in the face was enough, not a ducking bender to the head. Then more people chimed in and said the foreman should be fired too, because he was an a-hole for not separating them before things got out of hand, and thought it was funny until crap got real. Once a higher-up was called out, the backpedaling began. They rehired the guy, sent him to another job site, and told him to behave himself. But a month later, he threatened someone else, and they didn't wait for it to escalate again, and fired him on the spot. Story 19. The guy who hired me sent out a mass email to our massive company with all the ridiculous cover letters and CVS he had received over the year. Just hilarious stuff, honestly. It was for a game testing company, and there were so many desperate letters from people who clearly knew nothing about gaming. Unfortunately, he didn't bother censoring any of the names or contact info. He was fired within an hour. Story 20. My boss just told us this story the other day of how someone got fired for an insane reason. I worked for a call center, and a lady called in and had a very thick accent. The guy who answered was getting really frustrated because he was having a hard time understanding what she was saying, so he was kind of a banana to her, which is obviously unwarranted and really inappropriate. At the end of the call, she said, "You're not very good at customer service, are you?" And he replied with, "At least I know how to speak English like someone who lives in America." What the heck? Who says that at all? Let alone at work where all of our calls are recorded? He was fired very quickly because she called back and filed a complaint, which triggered a supervisor to pull the call and listen to it right away. Story 21. I work as an intern at a daycare. Dude got fired because he was caught playing with himself in the janitor's closet, right when the inspector walked in to make sure it was up to code. Worst part? He was already creepy. Everyone avoided him because he gave scary, creepy vibes. He was caught with SEEP on his work computer when it went to delete his account after he was fired. None of the female staff liked him. He's under Megan's Law now, and I'm not sure what his sentence was or is, but I know that much. It's scary how he got past every single background check. He absolutely bombed the interview. His resume was great. He had great references. He seemed like a really great guy until that came out. Story 22. I feel like for the first half of my career when I was hopping between private companies, I had a coworker completely self-destruct and go down in a blaze of glory about once a year. My personal favorite was a guy who showed up one morning drunk and tried to fight the vice president in front of a group of new hires. He's not the craziest, but kind of my hero, because everyone there wanted to kick that guy's ass. Close runner-up was an operations director who called an employee he thought was selling substances trying to score some substances. Triggered an investigation, and director failed the substances test. Third place is probably a dispatcher who was also a volunteer firefighter who was starting fires, so he could pretend to be a hero. One got super out of control, burning down several houses. People got really suspicious when the department suddenly went from like 2 fires a month to 10, and the same guy was always first to the station. He's in prison now. Beyond that, there's a supervisor getting substances out of the building by the FBI who arrested him for CP, including a bunch on his work computer. A partner just flipped out one night while off duty and hit a cop in the leg. One guy tried to fake his death and was found in Mississippi with a second family he apparently had. One stealing substances from the safe right in front of the incredibly conspicuous security camera, and a few for having sex at the station while on duty. Story 23. I remember my friend and I got hired at Tony Roma's in Banff. It was inside a hotel, so everyone that worked for the hotel and for the restaurant lived in housing supplied together. Some of the funniest times of my life. I remember we saw this dude one night wandering out back the supplied housing, and the next day they hired this guy. So on his first day, we're prepping vegetables, and he starts grabbing a knife by the handle and throwing it up in the air and catching it by the handle, and literally on his third try, the knife went up in the air, spun around and landed blade down in his hand and hit his hand straight across. They bandaged his hand and laid him off at the end of his shift. It was literally one of the funniest things that I've ever seen in my entire life, and the guy was strange from beginning to end. Story 24. A couple instances when I used to work at an advertising agency. One, My boss hired a new team member, stellar resume, interviewed well and joined the team. A couple months later, she was found unconscious on the floor of the women's bathroom. Paramedics were called, and she spent the rest of the week at home recuperating. We didn't know what happened until a couple weeks later the same thing happened, except this time, she had a packet of substances next to her on the floor. Cops came with the paramedics this time. 2. One of our biggest clients was a well-known automotive company. They had a driverless car feature that was launching, and the agency team servicing the client planned a media campaign coinciding with the Super Bowl that had this car do a cross-country road trip ending at the Super Bowl site that year. Well, for an entire week, the entire trip goes incredibly well, until just as they were about to complete the trip, the car hits and injures a woman, literally 2 miles from the finish line. The client was so livid but unwilling to accept responsibility and demanded that the agency fall on the sword. They ended up firing the account lead who was running the campaign. It was so ducked, he rightfully traded at the CEO, and the entire office could hear him screaming from all the way on the other side of the building. He was escorted out of the building, but I hope he sued. Story 25. I'm in it, my employer took over another company, and it needed to be integrated into our own its infrastructure because theirs was just an absolute mess. They had an IT admin there already who literally pulled wires out of our equipment while we were transferring their company data to our systems because he didn't trust it. Weeks of work down the drain. He blocked our access to computers who used to be only his to manage, and because he only worked 9 only, we couldn't provide end-user support outside those hours. He couldn't be reached outside those hours in any way, so one time we had no choice but to reset the password to his account without his knowledge to simply get the company back up and running. He accused coworkers and the CEO of being an idiot. He also went bad crap crazy every time someone miswrote his name. He seriously had a really difficult and hard to pronounce name. And when we were done moving all their stuff over to our systems and got ready to be there really early on Monday to help all of his users with logging into a completely new, to them, IT system, he refused. His workday starts at 9 o'clock, so he suggested nobody could start work until 9. So my manager and I were there Monday morning at 7 a.m. sharp after a 2-hour drive to get there. Story 26. Guy created a whole identity with degree, past job history, people that vouched for him. It was literally all just him, though. He made the degree, was his own references. He couldn't do the job at all, though, and it was all investigated when they dug into him. He did have a 6-figure job for a couple weeks, though. Story 27. We had a cleaning company at a previous job, very small office, but we had a gym in the building. They would clean the office daily after hours, including the gym and locker room. Basically just oversized bathrooms with a handful of lockers in them. One morning after my workout, I went into the women's room to get ready for the workday and opened my locker to find my little basket with toiletries was pushed all the way to the back, and my spare workout clothes were in front. Immediately thought this was odd. We didn't have locks on the lockers because it was such a small office, and it was understood who had which locker. Only one other woman in the building besides me, and I knew it wasn't her, but still asked her to be sure she didn't mistakenly open the wrong one or something. We pulled the security cameras from the night before. When the cleaning folks would clean the locker room, they'd prop the doors open. With the door propped, I had a clear view of the lockers and sure enough caught a male cleaning staffer opening the lockers and poking through them, including removing my clothing items and inspecting them before putting them back. I don't know if he was actually fired or just removed from our job, but it was unsettling to say the least. Story 28. This girl, on her second shift at Orange Julius, fell asleep in the supply room. She was the only one on shift, and she was out for a good couple of hours. Story 29. Some dudes on the last ship I was on got busted for substances. That's not the crazy part, how they got caught. So one of the guys has an on and off again girlfriend, and she starts cheating on him with his uncle. Guy 1 is like, hey, duck that, and starts banging one of the female officers on the boat and doing substances with her off of her body. Guy number 2 also joins in on the fun. The girlfriend of Guy 1 gets mad at him for cheating and tells our command, like phones, the captain himself. Captain calls CGI's Coast Guard NCIS, any, who they tell the captain, you can substances test just those 2 guys, or you can test everyone. Captain says everyone. So people not even involved in the get love triangle get busted. Oh, and the plot thickened. The officer Guy 1 was banging was going to get off scot-free, but she slept with another officer, and he got jealous that she wouldn't date him, so he ratted on her for banging enlisted dudes, which is a big no in the military. Long and short, a whole bunch of people got kicked out of the Coast Guard, all because of a jealous girlfriend. I'm not defending the substances. I just think adults should be able to do what they want with their bodies. Story 30. Our library assistant sneaks her side dude into our high school and stashes him away in a storage space so she can have sex with him during work. I work in a private high school. Our library assistant is a married lady in her early 30s, been working at the school for a few years. Apparently, she comes to work an hour earlier than everyone else and leaves earlier than everyone else, which is fine and nobody cares. Last year, the school was cleaning out some of the storage spaces, and when they opened one of the storage spaces under the stairway, they found a bed in there and a man sitting on the bed eating lunch. Picture Harry Potter's bedroom. Nobody knows who he is, and when they asked, he said he's a friend of the library assistant. So of course the school freaks out that we have a stranger on campus, eating instant noodles and apparently sleeping in a storage space. After some investigation, it turns out the guy is the library assistant's side dude, and she has been sneaking him into school for over a year or so. And that's why she's always been coming to school early. She would also disappear for hours on end during the day to fool around with him in the storage space. Needless to say, she was fired immediately. Story 31. A guy in grounds went to the compost heap. It was as big as your house and collected methane, which is heavier than air. He dug a hole at the compost heap and lit the methane on fire. He was fired a half of an hour later. There was also the guy in the custodial department that decided to go to the liquor store across the street on his break. He then drove around in an employer-owned vehicle while hitting on the stroller moms. This was on Memorial Day. His direct report wasn't high enough to do something about it. The next person up was on vacation. The next person up had only worked there for 7 days. So the person that fired him was the CEO directly. Story 32. A terrible employee that was the nephew of the supervisor's wife. The guy literally didn't do anything but the bare minimum. Didn't train. When he had to train, he couldn't actually train new employees. Spend hours chatting with the bosses who he befriended. Eventually, he got put into a second-in-command position. And when his shift supervisor left, he was put in charge. Couldn't do the job, and my boss would spend the first couple hours of her shift doing the stuff he didn't know how to do or just didn't do. Eventually, we got an employee hired on that he knew, and he fought tooth and nail to get her on his crew. Took time personally to train her himself. At the end of her work week, she came to our crew for supplemental training because she wasn't actually trained appropriately. She worked for 2 weeks before coming back to my crew and confiding in me how he was harassing her during and off work. Final straw was when she confided in my boss that he took her to an area that wasn't monitored by cameras just to make out with her on the clock. So finally, after 6 years of incompetence, it was finally the one final and indisputable nail in the here that finally ended his job. Story 33. I was an account executive with a software company. New hire Joe was a technical sales rep. A TSR's job was to support sales cycles, answer the technical sections of RFPs, deliver presentations about product capabilities, validate that the products would work in the proposed operating environments, code custom demonstrations using the prospect's data, and so on. Joe was an oddball. He was a volunteer fireman in his hometown, and this activity so obsessed him it was the only subject he ever discussed. The vehicles, the equipment, the call-outs, the fires, the traffic accidents, the babies delivered in grocery stores, and so on. No sports, no television, no movies, no family news, no gossip, no politics. Never anything that normal people might converse about with colleagues in the office. Joe was a firefighting monomaniac and off-the-charts boring. Sadly for him, Joe was fired not long after he joined us for behavior that instantly made the rounds of the company. In a meeting with prospects at which he was to give a presentation, perhaps he was actually presenting, I forget, the portable fireman's radio he habitually carried and had on his desk made an urgent squawk of some kind. Joe picked it up and without explanation left the room and the meeting, went to his car, and departed the office at speed. Story 34. They got fired for getting injured at work, not following protocols. This was a restaurant chain that was holding on by a thread. When I was hired, it was stressed to me that you would be fired on the spot if you obtained an injury worth reporting. The manager even highlighted the section of the employee handbook that loosely provided the wording to support it. Reportable injuries can be handled at the discretion of management, and their discretion was that if you got injured, you were not following safety protocols, which cost the company money, paying your medical plus shift coverage for time missed, which makes you a liability, so you're gone. New hire on the prep team had to open a sealed bag of something. He grabs the bag at the top with one hand and holds it up, and takes a prep knife, stabs the bag, and tries to slice it open. The knife went squirrely on the center seal of the bag, and he sliced his finger open. We had a tool for that job. It was a razor blade housed within a plastic hook, which made it impossible to get cut from. Dude couldn't get the bleeding under control and had to leave. Fired the next day. Story 35. Drunkenly hitting on a coworker, stumbling drunkenly down the hall, and then arguing with his wife in a common area before driving home drunk in a senior living community, calling out of half her shifts her first week and then claiming she didn't know she worked weekend. Also telling people we had a secret COVID outbreak we were covering up. Manager ducking one of his only 2 employees and sneaking off to make time while I ran the restaurant alone. Refusing to take instruction from the people training her and then trying to tell senior employees how to do their jobs, and then claiming hostile workplace when the senior employees said that's not correct. Knew we couldn't look ourselves up in a secure system we had access to, so he asked his coworker to do it. They were in the 2 desks closest to the supervisor, who watched the entire thing and then got their browser history to prove it. He was on probation at the time. I think that's everyone who had a crazy firing, but we had one girl who was fired just for being bad at her job, and she came back the next day to try and yell at the boss some more. Story 36. It was not exactly crazy, but it was really stupid. I used to work at a state park that had a campground. By the time I was there, plots were mostly reserved online through the phone, but not my office. There was a good faith exception where if you rolled in for one night after the park office closed, you check in with our designated park person who could camp there at an extreme discount just to collect on and organize these one-nightery. It's a gorgeous state park, BTW. Anyway, there was also a guy running security 24/7. One night, one of the younger camp officers rolled up on DPP after she had collected the fee for a one-nightery and straight up turned to the security guard and offered to split the take. This was in 2004, so it was probably all of $8 that night. This was small state park with excellent facilities. I think the plots were $25 a day on average, back when only the most bougie campers expected electric and septic. She had a primo camping location for free in exchange for collecting money when everything was offline. This crap still boggles my mind. Story 37. I was a construction foreman, and after warnings had to fire someone I found working without the hard hat and hearing and eye protection issued to him. 3 strikes, you're out. Story 38. I'm a painter by trade, and I did a lot of commercial painting in the beginning of my career, so people's houses, that sort of thing, but you would also do stuff like malls, schools, etc., especially in the summertime. And there'd always be some older guy, and then his kid would get hired for the summer. So the one summer we're working doing a school, and the one kid is left alone, and we're working late. We all packed up and went home for the night. Came back the next day, and someone from the property came to spoke to our boss. They had a conversation, and then he left. So the kid I referred to earlier was asked to go to the office and never came back to the job at the school. And our boss ended up telling us he was seen that day, wasn't working, and they saw him peg a bird with a rock, and then it fell to the ground, and then he stomped it out, all on surveillance camera. Story 39. Coworker named Travis, not Scott, a hardware store, was making pipes out of the brass fittings we sold, and then using them to smoke pot at the far end of our lumber warehouse, behind the table saw. The same warehouse where he would be driving the forklift, bringing down hundreds of pounds of lumber near customers so they could choose the best boards. The boss, Mike, found out that some employee was doing, and then happened to find Travis's poorly hidden stash of substances outside in these big oak half barrels we sold for gardening. Mike took the stash and just held on to it, and soon Travis sheepishly walked into Mike's office, asking if he had seen it. Travis's family owned a single Taste Freeze-like ice cream and cheap burger place that was popular with the local high school, and I think somehow that made him think he was therefore the untouchable son of the town mayor or something. Just crazy big fish in a small pond entitlement. Travis was fired and he walked out of the office without his stash. Story 40. Knew someone who got fired because he seemed too depressed. He was in the middle of a horrible divorce, but was still doing all his work. He just understandingly looked sad. Story 41. He kept offering me and my other employees rides home, even if we told him, no thanks, I drove here myself. One day he kept asking this coworker of mine to drive her home, over and over, and my female boss overheard and he was fired on the spot. Another time when I worked at Starbucks, I worked with 2 men in their 50s. One I really liked. He was a really nice Dutch guy and I was friends with his son. The other was a complete git. One day the Dutch guy accidentally got in Git's way and he grabbed him by the shirt and shoved him up against the fridge. I literally smacked him in the back and shoulder with a metal steaming pitcher to get him to let go of him. Git was fired. Story 42. Man, when I worked at a nursing home, it seems like the crazy reason someone was fired happened every other week. 1. CNA went to the administrator's office and started yelling at her and made a move to jump over her desk to physically attack her. 2. Nurse came to work drunk and or high. This happened many times with different nurses. 3. During his first week, new first shift nursing supervisor fell asleep during his lunch with his face in his salad. Later that same day, he was found asleep on his desk. 4. Staff having sex in empty resident room. 5. Staff slapped a resident. 6. Staff abused an unresponsive resident. 7. Staff called a resident name. 8. Staff stole a resident's Air Jordan. 9. Many examples of nurses or CNAs doing insane things, but I don't want to admit I knew about them, so I can't be specific. All I will say is that the real reason they were fired isn't on any paperwork, and instead, paperwork has vague statements about not following policies. So many more. Story 43. I used to work for a place that delivered bulk materials for landscaping, and we hired a new driver for deliveries that required a CDL. He was a pretty serious guy, and up to this point, had never had an issue with any deliveries. He took a dump truck out to a house one day to deliver some mulch and couldn't get the truck up the driveway. Instead, he tore ass through their lawn after getting pissed and dumped it in some random part of the yard. In the process, he tore up a section of the lawn, cracked sections of their driveway, and broke a massive limb off one of the trees. When he came back to the lot, he didn't think he had done anything wrong. He got in a huge fight with our manager, and our other manager was about to call the cops when he finally decided to leave. The most recent one where I work now was a guy who, among other things, creeped on some of the cleaning staff. Story 44. I used to work in a petroleum products warehouse where we'd receive thousands of gallons of different crap and send it either to on-site storage tanks or pump it directly into 55-gal drums. One guy ducked the valves up when receiving product and sent it to the wrong tank. To make things worse, the product was incompatible, so both what was in the tank and what was sent to the tank was ruined and would need to be properly disposed of. To make things even worse, the tank he sent the product to was nearly full at the time, so it quickly ran out of room and the tank overfilled out the emergency venting to the tank farm. While it wasn't an ecological disaster, it cost the company, I'd assume, well over $100,000 back in the day, so a lot of money. That was only one of many duck-ups, so they didn't mind that it was the final straw. Story 45. My friend and I were 18, got served at the company Christmas party. We did some crap and got kicked out, just being jackasses, nothing serious. Well, the cops were outside waiting for us, and we got arrested for minor consumption. We had to call into work, collect from the jail next Monday, because they wouldn't let us out. Well, my friend had a kid and girlfriend he was supporting, and I had nothing. So somebody was getting fired, and that guy was me. I knew it, everyone knew it. I came in, worked half a shift. Then we had the talk. I made a scene for one reason. God damn it, Bob. You could have just called me. You made me come in while everyone is looking at me like a dead man walking. Plus, it was a 40-minute drive. Duck Bob. But I have no regrets taking the heat for my friend. That kid has a family of her own now, 2 boys and 1 girl. Story 46. Not my story, but instead my mom. She works in a mill that makes dog and cat food, and the new supervisor has been firing people left and right. Despite them struggling to keep workers BC, they work 7 days per week. The supervisor decided to make a fire exit only sign for one of the mill doors, but it's only on the outside. The issue is that this door is heavily used by many in the mill, and when someone goes through it, an alarm goes off and it sends a notif to his phone, just in case something goes wrong. Ding, ding, ding. People are so used to going through the door that with the exit-only sign being on the outside, it's easy to forget. He fired one of the workers for going through the door on accident twice in a day. After 7 years in the mill, my mother won't be walking on eggshells over a new a-hole who's itching for a reason to fire someone, and she's looking for a new job. Story 47. In a healthcare setting, a woman performing a striptease lap dance on a long counter desk for 2 men when all 3 were supposed to be watching critical monitoring equipment. All 3 got fired. The girl's excuse, "I crap thee not," was that her boss had told them in a staff meeting they all needed to work on team building. My flabber was gasted. Story 48. I was an usher in a movie theater when I was in 1989. We hired a guy that looked just like RDJ who got fired for tearing tickets and saying, "Enjoy your movie or burn in hell." Story 49. Got thrown in prison because he abused. He came into work after making bail and had to be escorted out by the foreman because a bunch of the guys on the floor wanted to hit him. He also wrote a really crafty zombie apocalypse novel from prison and sent me a copy for some reason. It sucked but worked great as bedding for my kid's hamster. Story 50. A guy I worked with on a ship was a fugitive from Mississippi. He had a twin brother who was a seaman, so he snagged his documents and got a job sailing. Cops snapped up his brother who didn't want to do the time and gave up everything. Fed marshals were going to come get him when we pulled into Puerto Rico. We got in earlier than planned. Guy lost it when he found out he wasn't supposed to leave ship that marshal was coming for him. He chased captain around the ship threatening him. Last I saw him, he was walking down the pier. Never found out if they got him. Supposedly, he was convicted of homicide, hard worker, and good guy, to be honest. You never know what lurks in your coworker's closet. Story 51. This was back in like 99 or... He missed work one day. No notice. The next morning, we saw him on the front page of the newspaper. He had tried to rob a mom-and-pop video store by dressing in drag, carrying a syringe, and threatening to inject them with HIV. Turns out, he was an addict and wanted more money for substances. Never saw him again, but they technically did fire him. I don't know if he ever went to jail or anything because of it, but a couple of months ago, I just randomly thought of him and decided to Google his name. I ended up finding an obituary for him from 2010. Rip Dylan, I don't know the circumstances behind your passing, but I do hope that you were able to conquer your demons in the end. Story 52. severe ADHD and a corporate job. He couldn't bear sitting down for longer than 10 minutes at a time. He had to walk around the floor for some time before he was able to sit down again and do some work. It wasn't just disruptive to his own workflow. It's kind of hard to focus when there's this guy constantly marching back and forth next to you, often talking to himself. That's normal work. Now imagine him in a boring 2 hours meeting. Yep, it was bad. He would leave, come back, too many times to count. The same managers who hired him, owing to his skills, got very annoyed very quickly. He lasted a week. It's still a mystery to me why he chose a corporate job or how he survived in his previous jobs. Better meds, maybe? Story 53. I've got another one. Fellow was a production supervisor, and he was having a relationship with one of his hourly operators. She wanted to take their relationship to the next level and wanted him to leave his wife. When he refused, she threatened to call and tell her. His reaction? He took her into the supervisor office and beat her ass. He waited till break was over so everyone was back at their stations and forced her to punch out and leave. Naturally, this did not end well for him. In a few short minutes, he went from employed, married, and not a felon to unemployed, getting divorced, and with a felony rap. Story 54. He and an unnamed coworker, both of which were married, were caught sleeping together somewhere in the office. His desk was on my floor. We got the email saying he was out. Next day, he tried, unsuccessfully, not to make eye contact with us while he put his stuff in boxes and left. Here's the fun part. I had only been working there a few weeks, but I had instantly fallen in love with the ET guy assigned to my setup on day one, which we did in person. He was assigned to the cleanout after work hours, and I joined him. He took a funny-looking, color-changing lamp from the dude's desk. We have been dating 2 years, both onto better things. The little lamp is plugged in our living room. Story 55. Former supervisor got in an argument with his wife, came back up to the call center after hours with 3 of those really tall cans of beer, drank them in his cubicle, and threw the cans away in his trash can. The cleaning lady saw the can, reported them to her boss, who turned them over to the call center manager, showing him which cubicle they came from. They played back the security camera footage. Since he was salary, anytime he was on property, he was won the clock. He was fired. What makes this extra stupid? We live in Las Vegas. There is no such thing as last call. There is always a bar with cheap drinks open. 13 years with the company down the drain over a few gas station beer. Story 56. This happened in my first month at my current job, a hotel. I still don't know all the details, but I was there the day it happened. Apparently, someone in management came across a video that raised concerns, and so they confronted him about it. He very quickly started lashing out, shouting things like, "It's just a stupid ducking video," that I could hear from the next floor up. During this, he also threatened to hit the housekeeping supervisor, who was only present as a witness, in front of several other staff members. Police were called, he was detained overnight, and was banned from the property. Story 57. Crap company. A fellow employee got into an accident, had to be taken to the hospital, needed surgery fast. What does the company do? Fire the guy, so they don't have to pay for his treatment. That just got police and authorities snooping into every nook and cranny. Employee got his fingers fixed and was given a nice settlement, and the company had to pay a crapload of fines and other expenses. Here's the rub though. If they had paid for the surgery, it would be 100K to 150K pesos, $3K dollars, but instead, they paid millions. Story 58. Current job. HR found out a coworker had been charged with soliciting sex at some point. It's unclear when, but I believe it was before he was employed with us. They decided they did not want that kind of person at our company, and with as little fanfare as you can imagine, let him go. He always seemed like a decent guy. I helped train him, but in retrospect, I gotta say he ticked a lot of boxes. Previous job, a guy got bounced right in front of me and a couple coworkers for harassment. He accosted a female coworker within sight of a floor manager who promptly walked him off the premises, came back in and filed the paperwork to terminate him. Maybe 10 minutes all told. Call centers are wild places. Story 59. Not flushing the toilet. He would go in the office bathroom loaded up with a giant crap and damn near full roll of toilet paper. He would never flush because he said touching the flush handle was gross. Everyone got sick of smelling his crap and plunging the toilet. Story 60. He took the identity of someone else and basically took the person's visa to perform overseas work. It took a few years for both governments and the employer to catch on. I guess he told everyone to call him by a certain nickname instead of the name on his documentation. The nickname was his real name. It was his plan to make the ruse more natural. Story 61. I don't know which is crazier. The lady who was sleeping with a bunch of her subordinates, the guy who was actually caught having sex with one subordinate on the property, or the guy who threatened my life. He was already walked out before I was told this. This was all within the same year. BTW. Crap was just crazy at that place. There were lots of inappropriate relationships, so I guess the guy who wanted to hit me takes the craziest reason medal. Story 62. Tried to forcefully kiss a girl. He had a girlfriend and he'd already pissed off 2 departments within his first week. Also, she definitely wasn't interested in him because he had a junk. Story 63. Same place for both of these. Story 1. 2 dudes fired, neither like the other. They had an argument over something. Dude 1 swore at Dude 2. Dude 2 recorded the conversation. Both fired. Dude 1 for swearing during official meeting, and Dude 2 for recording it and creating a toxic workplace. Story 2. Guy had a run-in with some lady over her being incompetent at her job. Guy later has a conversation about going duck hunting later that week and being excited. Lady hears conversation, has guy fired for thinly veiled threats of shooting violence in workplace. HR ignores all comments, saying it was innocent conversation about duck hunting and fires guy anyway. I have more. That place was so toxic. Story 64. A guy on my team went ballistic on our manager, who he thought was trying to make him look bad on a weekly status report to our corporate boss. He stood in her doorway screaming that he would destroy her personal and professional life. He made physical threats to her and her husband, and then refused to even acknowledge her every time they needed to work together. Everyone in the office walked on eggshells for the next month before our corporate officers finally came in town. Local police accompanied them to fire him and escort him to his car. He was uncontrollably sobbing as he was walked through the office on his way out. Story 65. Dude I worked with was doing substances in the job. We were having an employee potluck, and the boss made some prime rib for the crew. In front of everyone, he fell asleep with his fork halfway to his face and just sat there, swaying slightly and snoring louder as his head started to droop. The boss politely woke him up and walked him up to the office. A little bit later, security showed up and escorted him out. Story 66. First week as assistant manager at a cell phone company store, a customer comes in furious because her young son's loaner phone, given while he waited for his cell to be repaired, contained a bunch of adult film. Whoever took the loaner back from the previous person didn't scrub it like we were supposed to. Manager and I sit down to go through paperwork to find the culprit. She's saying, "This is totally unacceptable, and we're going to make an example of this person." I pull the paperwork that shows it was her mistake, and she goes white. Later that day, area manager comes in, walks her out. I'm promoted to interim store manager on the spot. Story 67. I had a friend who was fired for being in a rig that had an accident that was won. The other driver's fault. He was not even the driver. Per their company policy, anyone who is in an accident has to be substances tested. He did THC as he is finishing up treatment for leukemia. He was riding passenger in truck that another drunk-ass driver rear-ended. He and the driver we tested per policy. We are also in a substances legal state, which I get still doesn't really matter given it's still federally illegal. Anyway, he popped pause for THC, so was fired. Story 68. A warehouse worker got fired for stealing Christmas presents that were meant for raffle prizes. He totally denied he took them, while also realizing there was a video camera that captured him entering the quarantine area and stealing them. TBF, his coworker, was fired after finding a missing document that she showed an auditor. It was still warm from the LaserJet printer. That firing took about 10 seconds. Story 69. My dad is an engineer and one of the guys was fired for doing substances at his desk. I don't remember now. He had a cubicle. Like, "Sir, everyone can see you and what you are doing." This wasn't like in the 80s. It was probably around 5 to 7 years ago. When I was a server, this other server liked to do pills. What a shock in the restaurant business. On 9/11, she definitely took too many, and she was tweaked out all night. She told one of our bosses it was because she was a flight attendant and it could have been her that day, so she was just really sad. Story 70. They found out one of their subordinates was possibly defrauding the company or one of our customers. Higher management was aware and told them to leave it be, and it was being handled. This person decided to drive across state lines to confront the manager about the fraud and proceeded to get into a fistfight with the manager. Upper management found out, and he was terminated immediately. He was set to become a divisional manager and be set for life. Instead, he was hit with a lawsuit, and during discovery, it was found that he was messaging escort and his marriage fell apart because of it. Story 71. Chef went to a convention, got wasted on the way there, drank more at the bar, ran around and dodged security. Rejoined the group, visibly trashed, and the group was kicked out. Doesn't stop there. Everyone wanted to get an Uber. Chef hailed a random guy with an Uber sticker on his car. Driver didn't speak English and drove in the wrong direction. Chef told him he was going to force feed him a bag of junks. Somehow driver got to the right place. Chef made some awful comments to a security guard, wasn't allowed to board the vehicle to get back home, snuck on, and was kicked off at the next stop. Chef got fired. Story 72. One of the secretaries robbed a bank over her lunch hour. The FBI came to the office to retrieve her. In another incident, a couple of guys were making meth in one of the labs. Story 73. I was a supervisor for a contractor that did cable installation. My fellow supervisor was in charge of the GPS system on our vehicle and was always on top of checking it to make sure PPL were moving. We had a tech pass out from heat stroke in his vehicle. Prior to this, may have died if the customer hadn't checked on him after he was sitting there for over an hour. Well, one day a tech was just sitting somewhere, out of the way, so he got worried, checked the driver-facing camera, and this dude was smoking while looking directly into the camera with the vehicle on. So yeah, crazy stupid. Story 74. Stole traveler's checks from her coworker, and when caught, ran to a waiting car in the parking lot and tried to sick her boyfriend's 2 pit bulls on her boss and site security. Story 75. They were on day shift, but they got fired for boofing wine in the bathroom. This was a big grocery store. Apparently, they had been in trouble before for showing up to work drunk and/or drinking on the clock. Managers smelled it on their breath. Their solution was to butt chug their wine instead. I don't recall exactly how they got caught, but yeah, I hope they got some help. What's the dumbest reason you've seen someone get fired or quit a job? Story 1. This intern showed up on the first day acting like he owned the place, knew it all, and there wasn't anything that any one of us could teach him. At first, I let it slide. Maybe it's nerves and his way of camouflaging his insecurities or something I had worse and weirder. Then told them, he started together with another intern at the same time, they had to wait for me to assign them repairs or new builds. It was at a PC store that sold, repaired, and custom-built computers. Had to check first what was what, which ones needed priority, and more importantly, which ones do I think they can handle. Among other duties like helping customers, man the phone, inventory, RMA, etc. Dude didn't give a crap or got bored. I don't know, but while I'm busy with a customer drawing up a quote for a custom PC, he just took one crate from the to-do rack and went his merry way. Turned out to be a new build for a gaming PC, so that means expensive parts, sensitive parts, pretty specialized and difficult, especially for a first-day intern without any experience. You know how CPUs, processor, back then at least had a crapload of tiny pins that had to be inserted into the motherboard at one specific way? You do know. So did he learn? By the time I got back to them, he had already been to town on that crap and it looked like a disaster, and it was one. He just had forcefully pushed the CPU into the socket the wrong way. Pins flattened, smashed. The cooler on top fastened with tie wraps somehow. It has predetermined holes on the motherboard where you click in the pins that equally fastens, places it on top of said CPU. Cooling paste? What is cooling paste? Or rather, where is cooling paste? Not that that would have mattered at this point anyway. But for sake of disaster completion, the power supply upside down, so the cooling fan it has at the bottom, normally, now tight against the metal of the PC case. That airflow had to be sick, dude. No, really, like KOPD, no airflow sick. And does it really need all those connectors actually connected to the motherboard and the graphics card and crap? And did you know that in the PC desktop case, there are all those colorful little wires with cutesy little connectors that fit basically on all those brass gold looking pins on the motherboard? No need to connect them in a specific way or place. They fit on all of them just the same. Super handy. Anyhow, y'all get a picture here, I think. He probably had more very not funny crap like this in this one build, which I'd credit him for. Had it not been this expensive, costly duck-up, he did in under an hour, in which I helped that one customer. Those sittings with customers take a while, and depending on what they want and how custom it needs to be, it can easily take 1.5 to 2 hours, just FYI. We thanked the flying spaghetti monster, though, for the fact that he hadn't powered this death trap on, exploding, electrocution, fire, or making our electricity grid go bye-bye, or all the above could have happened then. A CPU of CA $500 and $600 totaled, motherboard actually had a crack in it because of tie wrapping the cooler very tightly on one side, of course, so also totaled, and the connector on the graphics card broken off, but that I managed to repair. His response to this? There wasn't anyone guiding him, so how could he know? Not my fault that y'all not doing your job, and sat his fat behind on the workbench, which he was also warned about before, to not do as it wouldn't hold up his dumb ass. Looking smug, and then the bench went crack, dude flat on the floor with some PCs in repair as well. We laughed a minute, and then I yelled a little longer, but to the effect of him getting TF out and never return. He did so in tears, which kinda got to me still and questioning myself if I wasn't too hard. That disappeared very soon after dude's daddy came storming in demanding to see the ahole that fired his poor son over nothing and then made fun of him for it. This ahole did the difficult swallowing thingy one does when one seizes a situation upcoming and favors the odds not likable. Why? Daddy of Git was also a big presence. Very, very big, but not as in fat, but as in dude, scares the weightlifting equipment on approach. Myself then being hardly 110 pounds at 1.75 millimeters. Don't know y'all's metrics for that. However, dude was actually very likable and chill. Once I laid out for him the events of that day and the attitude his boy had overall. Had a good talk, and then he nearly dragged Sonny Boy along by his ears while cussing him out, saying things like it hadn't been the first nor second time he got kicked out either a job or internship. Fun times though. Story 2. I used to work QC for a medical substances company. A packaging tech was fired because he was caught eating raw flour on the line. When asked why he did that, he responded, "Nobody explicitly told me I could not eat the weed." Story 3. I've seen a sous chef throw a lobster tail at our grill cook for going to the bathroom to drink during the New Year's rush. Neither of them got fired because good help is hard to find. It was an open kitchen too, so the entire restaurant saw and then heard the ensuing shouting match. Made for a fun work environment. I'm glad I didn't live at the staff house. I had to forcibly separate them. Suze was a big dude, built like butchers are, but the cook had a wrestling background even if his build was mitigated by a crippling coke alcohol addiction. Looking back, I probably should have just let them both go out back and get it out of their system. Instead, I put them both in timeout and then ran the line, an expo, and my own crap for 15 minutes while they untwisted their panties. Head chef was in the office with the pastry chef, his girlfriend. I was just supposed to be the pans guy that night. We all got let go a few months later because the restaurant wasn't attracting enough wealthy clientele. We sold food but not wine, and wine is where the money is at. Went through 3 different sommeliers in a year. I've got some duckin' stories from that place, man. Saw a guy start an oil fire on a Plaza station once and panicked and just threw his flaming pan into the garbage, which lit the whole garbage on fire. So he picks it up and runs the whole bin out back. He wasn't back after a couple of minutes, so I go out to check on him, and he's just standing there in the loading bay looking at the bubbling puddle of chemical fire that used to be our garbage bin. Another time, the gas valve on our broiler broke and caught fire, and was about to set the suppression system off. 10K repair plus cleaning, which would be extra grunt work for us. Plus throwing out all the food that would be contaminated. Plus, we'd all lose at least 2 days of work and therefore pay while they bring someone in to reprime the system. So the oyster chef wrapped a cloth around his finger and jammed it in the pipe like some kind of little ducking Dutch boy. I don't speak great Spanish, and I certainly don't know the words for gas kills which, but I know that's exactly what that dude was screaming at me. ALU were a real OG. Good times. I don't duck and miss it. Story 4. About 20 years ago, a guy started work with us and got a branded company car about 3 weeks after getting his driving license. In his first week, he pulled an illegal U-turn across 2 roads separated by a verge, knocks down a motorcyclist, and damages the car. He denies it to the police and tells them he was stationary and that the motorcyclist was speeding and crashed into him. The manager knows he's lying but doesn't fire him and backs him up to help reduce any potential liability. It doesn't make sense, but the police will investigate without taking his license. He borrows a replacement branded car from the pool and 2 days later decides to race a colleague at the traffic lights at the foot of Tower Bridge here in London. That's the iconic Raising Bridge in the heart of London, covered by cameras and often police. He bolts from the lights at full acceleration, but our colleague isn't stupid enough to race him. So boy, racer slams on the brakes. As a Raising Bridge, there is a metal lip that is safe to drive over, but will shred your tires if you brake from warp speed. All 4 tires pop, and he's now cutting into a global landmark with his crushed, sparking rim. There is now a major police operation to get his car off the bridge and unblock half of London's traffic. Knowing he is under investigation, he says he had to swerve to avoid a drunk driver and that he gets sex his head and needs to go get medical attention. He leaves the scene having lied to police for the 2nd time in a week, wrecking his slim chance of beating the charges for the first crash and creating a lie that can be disproven once they check the camera tapes. The next morning, he then lies to get a 3rd car from the car park, a Virgin Red sports model with only delivery miles, telling our fleet administrator that's the hire car replacement for his first car, and he never got a 2nd car. He then drives it on his weekend off and decides to tear through country lanes doing handbrake turns, spraying the car with gravel and wrecking the bodywork and paint. Literally primer and bare metal, showing through inch-wide dents when he's back on Monday. So the idiot wrecks 3 cars in a week, lies to the police, and then nukes any chance of the company writing off his accidents. The policy is, it's easier to just claim insurance if it's 1 incident. So 3 sackable offenses in about a week because he was a fool. Story 5. I used to work in a restaurant. The owner was clearly trying to get rid of all the older employees. I was 23 and trying to replace with 16-year-olds who were cheaper. I was the last one left as I was the part-time manager there. One morning he came by. I had just gotten my fingers between the door and it was all bruised and I was cooling it. The chef was helping me. The owner stormed into the kitchen and asked me why in the hell I hadn't opened the parasols outside just yet, because it was almost opening time, and closed parasols don't look good. I got fired for that. Story 6. Many years ago, I worked for a big hotel that had lots of rules regarding staff perks, one of which being in regards to accessing the food and beverage services available in the hotel. 3 restaurants, 3 bars, afternoon tea room, and a coffee shop. As a perk, staff received 50% off in the restaurants and coffee shop and 25% off in the bars. You were fine to use any, as long as you were dressed appropriately, and cleared it with a manager first. If that area was busy, the manager would ask you to leave, and you were to do so without fuss. I worked in the coffee shop, and a new hire started while I was on my annual leave. My first day back, she tells me halfway through her shift she needed to go home and feed the dogs. I said no problem. I can give her an hour break because we're not busy. She went home and never came back in that day. She then phoned in sick the next day and put in a sick line, and another one, and another one. Okay, these things happen, what can you do? 6 weeks into her sick lines, bear in mind, she hadn't even worked a full week at this point. I look into the face of the annoying customer who has been showing up every week without fail during our busiest time, and being a demanding pause and realize who it is. It's our sick colleague. I will quietly explain the situation with how the staff perks work, and that she needs to clear it with a manager first, and that she shouldn't be coming at our busiest time. She replies that it was apparently part of her return to work process. What she didn't realize was that the HR manager was at the next table over with a VIP guest and asked me for the details. When she came to sign the check, HR had no idea about this return to work process. The girl was fired and had to pay back the 6 weeks of sick leave. Story 7. I was fired because the manager ducked up. I no called, no showed while not knowing I was scheduled to work. The work schedule was in the manager's office. I went to go check it, but they were having a quick meeting. One of the managers noticed me waiting quietly at the office door and came over to find out what I wanted. Let him know I was trying to check my work schedule. He told me, "You don't work this weekend." Cool, so I went to my friend's place for the weekend to game. Sunday morning, my mom calls to tell me my boss has been trying to reach me. I call him back and it's the manager who read off my schedule to him. Fires me for being a no call, no show. Didn't care when I pointed out he was the one that told me I didn't work. Story 8. Worked for the government in my early 20s, basically dealing with benefit claims for people too sick to work, etc. We had access to a system that told us everything about a claimant, what they claimed benefit-wise, what they suffered with, address, personal details, etc. The first thing we got told on our first day in the office using these systems was that never put our own details in the system to check your own profile. Some people had been on benefits before working there, as it's against company policy and data protection and all that. It was legit the first thing we got told, and it was hammered into us that we would be instantly dismissed without any hesitation. As it was also explained, every PC is monitored, and the system will immediately alert a manager if any employer's details are emupped in any PC system at any time. It was explained to us several times. Some girl who was very annoying and kept asking to borrow money off fellow colleagues. Weird as we all didn't early know each other properly. It had been mere weeks as we were all new employees in training. Ended up getting an immediate dismissal for the exact thing we were told several times not to do. She had, for some reason, put in her whole national insurance number in the colleague's computer next to her. So first off, she could have gotten someone else fired as she used it while they stepped out of the room. She also did manage to successfully borrow 100 of the same lad whose computer. She used to check her own details. And as she was fired, we never seen her again. And the dude she owed money to literally never got paid back. Some people just don't learn. Story 9. I managed the banquet team and bar of a hotel once upon a time. Our uniforms were very casual. In fact, they encouraged jeans and the hotel branded polos as everyday attire, and essentially told the managers never to wear suits and to have fun with the term casual professional in our wardrobes. We have a couple of big local colleges and a pro sport team in the state, and we were informed that on game days only, we were okay to wear a t-shirt or polo for whatever team was playing. This ducking guy, we'll call him Trex because that's what the entire staff called him, came in at least once a weekend to work a shift in a jersey, yes, full-on ducking jersey, off teams that weren't even local teams. So I talked to him and say, "Hey dude, we do have a pretty loose policy, but you can't just wear a sports jersey to bartend here, man. This isn't a sports bar. Needs to be a local team on that team's game day and not a jersey, okay?" Happens again. I'm like, "Trex, no. Go to the AGM's office and grab a hotel branded polo." He balks, saying he didn't think he should have to change his shirt. So I say, "Fine, you can have the night off in that case." Well, guy's a bartender and no work equals no money, so he argues again, saying I'm ducking, discriminating against him somehow. Before this argument is even over, the AGM walks through and she's like, "Hey, why are you in a Saints jersey, dude? Policy is local teams on game days and not a full-on jersey. You need to change." He basically says, "Duck you both," and leaves and never comes back. Insanity. The bartenders there made like $1,200 all weekend, sometimes more. I'm not sure why you'd walk away from money like that, but that idiot chose to die on a very stupid hill. Story 10. My first job was UPS overnight. I was there for 5 years. I had 50-something, no call, no shows through those years. There was a period where I got arrested and went to juvie. I was 18, but it was a juvenile probation violation. I did 90 days. Halfway through, my family got a letter from UPS saying I was on an unauthorized leave. The facility wasn't allowing furloughs at the time, but my grandmother called and talked to the head co, or whatever his title was, explained the situation, and promised to pick me up and drop me back off every day. They eventually agreed, and so every weekday I was out of juvie for around 5 hours, got to eat normal food, etc. So I survived all of that. About a year later, I was on my way to work. My car broke down about a half mile from the facility. I got a ride the rest of the way because someone saw me at the gas station. I got this big-ass T-shaped box that was ripped damaged. I had the truck, and was having a bad day. I ended up drawing on the box. It was basically a UPS guy holding the T part, like it was his junk, and it said, "Here's your package." Had the UPS logo on it and everything. Unfortunately for me, there was a bunch of regional guys there for some meetings that day, and my belt was right in front of the office. They saw the box and fired me that day. My union rep said he wanted to try and save my job, but because of all my no-shows, there was no chance. I was pretty depressed at the time, but turned out to be a blessing in disguise. I was miserable there, and working nights ducked me up. Story 11. Me and my BF used to both work at a little Chinese restaurant in our small town. He got fired for being 30 minutes late once. They then hired 2 more people. A few months later, when my BF got a new job just across the street next to the McDonald's, I got fired. Why? Because I was working a double with 2 other people. I'd only ever worked double either by myself or with one other server who came in at afternoon. Now before this, our schedule always had a note at the bottom that said, if you work a double and have another server working with you, you can take a 1-2 hour break. I would usually just not take my break. But this time my BF asked if I could grab him a coffee from the McDonald's and bring it to him next door. It took all of 15 minutes. I got back and was scolded for leaving and then fired after my shift. Also decided to check the schedule for the note to send to my manager. But since hiring more people, they had removed it and didn't tell any of us. Later got fired from a smoke shop after only 3 months for unclear reasons. The only issue my boss had with me there was that I didn't dress in crop tops and booty shorts. There was no dress code, so I would wear a t-shirt and either jeans or sweatpants and bring a jacket or hoodie because it got cold in there. Story 12. I worked for a dine-in movie theater. I know, dumb concept, but I made a lot of money as a bartender. The company had a hard rule that employees could not drink there, even off the clock. Apparently there was an incident. It was before I worked there, so I have no idea. We had a kid get hired right out of bartending school, and he was an ass. He kept bragging about how he could make a slow gin fizz. And we kept telling him that we had never even opened the bottle of slow gin, and if we ever got one ordered, we could just look up the recipe. Bartending isn't memorizing recipes, it's 90 cleaning, which is why it was baffling that he decided he had to clean the drains during Saturday evening rush. The 10% of the time you're actually bartending. We literally had to step over him, and it was obvious it was because he couldn't handle the rush of an actual bar, and freaked out. That's not what got him fired, though. That's what made us hate him. What got him fired was when the idiot hid a case of beer outside the emergency exit of an auditorium and proceeded to get completely blackout, vomit over the railing drunk during an employees-only screening of a movie. Not secretly either. If you've ever been in a theater when somebody opens the emergency exit, you kind of notice, especially when that person is so drunk they can barely walk. And all of his supervisors, direct and indirect, were in that auditorium. Story 13. I was working on 8 projects in a pharmaceuticals company in the early 1990s. One Monday morning, a colleague didn't show up to work. We wondered where he was, because he hadn't booked any vacation. It turns out he couldn't come to the office because he had been arrested during the weekend for dealing substances. We never saw him again. Story 14. I worked at a large retailer years ago. Towards the end of my time there, we had a major management shakeup due to poor sales and bad management prior to that. They hired some of the most incompetent and hostile middle managers I've ever worked with to this day. A lot of them seem to be looking for reasons to write people up and fire them. One day I get called up to the HR office, and one of the most notorious assistant managers is in there, along with our HR lady. I have no idea what this is about at the time, and they even asked me if I know why they called me up. I got written up for clocking in 1 minute before my lunch break was over. Apparently they were worried if they got audited, they could receive massive fines for this reason. I argued my phone said it was time, and they told me I was wrong. I told them they need to improve their process or provide us all with time sync devices so we know the second we can clock in. The assistant manager thought I was being a smartass. I wasn't, and decided to let me go. I was blindsided how quickly it went from talking to firing, which leads me to believe there was some other motive for wanting to let me go. All well, the job sucked anyways, and according to coworkers that stayed, it just got worse and worse. Story 15. I worked with a guy for years and we were pretty good buddies. He was a good guy. He had a fling with one of our female coworkers after a pretty rough divorce. She gabbed to all the other ladies we worked with the next day that he was not big junk. He found out and he quit on the spot. Fellas, if you ever find yourself in this situation, just know that there's a lot of ways to respond. Quitting your job at a dead sprint is really one of the worst options you can pick. It turned into a whole thing. HR had to get involved. Half the dudes on the floor were cracking jokes about, well, if that was his reason, I guess I better go ahead and quit too. People that never even worked there heard about it, and it got brought up several times when I told somebody where I worked for months. Story 16. I joined a rapidly growing company in a different country as a sales consultant for an entry-level role. There was a long interview process of about 6 or 7 stages with different tasks specific to the role involved, and an experience day where you show you've got what it takes to succeed. On the first day, I made friends with Rick, one of the other 25 new starters who moved to this new country, and we clicked pretty well. But I noticed he wasn't the sharpest tool in the box, and there was something off about him. Anyway, it's the Monday of our second week into the new job, and I go to take a smoke break only to find Rick is outside with his head between his hands looking desperately upset. It turns out that Rick had his girlfriend do all the tasks for the interview process for him. She was already experienced in this specific type of sales, and he wasn't capable at all. We were under a microscope of judgment at the start, and management had realized Rick was useless at sales. Rick was fired on the spot, jobless with no savings, and had to move back to Ireland within the space of about 12 days of starting the new role. The last time I heard from him, he was working in a factory on a line. Story 17. I was working as a driver for an agency. The company I was driving for was dodgy already. The drivers worked 6 days a week, but as the contract was 5 days, if you took a week off, you'd lose a day's pay. I booked 5 days off, thought I'd come back a day early so I didn't lose money. I walked into the office and my paperwork was missing, as were the truck keys. So I started thinking they didn't realize I was coming back today and go to find the manager. He sees me walking over to him and says, "What the duck are you doing here? You're not supposed to come back." Long story short, they used a different agency to find a cover driver, realized the other agency was cheaper, so kept that driver on and canceled my contract, but no one thought to tell me. I'd had a week off where I could have looked for other work but didn't. I'd got up in the middle of the night. I started work at 2:30 a.m. for absolutely nothing. I went home and back to bed and gave the agency an earful in the morning. They did the same thing to another driver, I later found out, but he rang the emergency out of hours for the angry and gave them an earful. Wish I'd thought to do that. Story 18. I work at a burger restaurant. This guy thought he was the crap when it came to working the grill, so much so that he refused to work any other station. We're all supposed to know how to work every station, so one day the manager assigned him to Fry Station to practice. Dude was steaming the whole shift. And towards the end of the night, he went up to the manager and started whisper arguing with him. I assumed because I was right next to the manager, and dude didn't want me to hear what was happening, but I heard most of it. He basically told the manager that he only comes to work the grill, and if he doesn't let him work grill, he'd walk out. Manager reiterated that he needed to learn all stations, so the dude loudly goes, "Well, it was nice working with all of you, I guess," and clocked out and left. This 30-year-old man threw a tantrum and quit on the spot because he couldn't bully his 20-year-old manager into letting him do what he wanted. This same guy tried to add me on Facebook afterwards and was bothering the managers for my phone number because he had a job opportunity for me. Gross. I wouldn't want to work with him again after witnessing that. Story 19. 2 doozies from my previous career as a restaurant manager. First, hired a delivery driver and she interviewed really well. At the end, I see she left the phone part of the application blank, so I ask her, assuming she forgot to fill it out. And she says I don't own a cell phone and I'm not interested in owning one. I ask her, then how am I supposed to get a hold of you about orders and things like that? She says I'll just ride my scooter back and talk to you in person. I had to tell her it wasn't going to work out. Second, we used to have all of our servers shadow in the kitchen for 2 days once hired so they could learn how the menu works, how things are cooked, etc. This one server we hired comes in for her first shift and I see she's wearing flip-flops. I tell her, "Oh, get changed because like I said earlier, you'll be in the kitchen for 2 days. She says, "I don't like how shoes feel." I was confused and asked, "Well, do you think even when you're on the floor as a server, you'll get to wear flip-flops?" She said, yay? Had to let her go after that comment. Story 20. My wife worked at a well-known sea-themed park where they have stadiums with shows of the marine mammals. She requested off 2 weeks, non-holiday, for our wedding and honeymoon. She went through a whole process with HR to have it properly approved. The time rolls around and, like the day before the wedding, They tried to schedule her on our honeymoon dates. She told them she'd been approved off. She was considered a no-show, technically quit. Fast forward several years and I was offered a job working for corporate. After 3 weeks, I was fired for an obviously made-up reason. While the park was suffering from low attendance just after reopening after COVID, and probably because they hadn't done their fiscal planning properly. HR actually told me that I was on the rehire list and to go ahead and apply to other jobs. We like to joke that she quit and is not on the rehire list, while I was fired and on the rehire list. Of course, I'll never apply to another job there. Story 21. I got fired yesterday because I'm injured and could not go to work. Corporate treated it akin to an ankle sprain, but in reality, the base of my spine was crushed, and I struggled to walk without assistance. They were demanding that I go to work, despite myself and my managers alike telling them that I couldn't. So they fired me. Story 22. This isn't so much a story of someone getting fired for a dumb reason, but how a really crappy person got fired for a dumb reason. So I had a manager who was a serial harasser. Like, a coworker of mine got around a half-dozen messages telling her to never be alone in a room with him after she got assigned to his team, and another coworker who filed a suit against the company related to his actions. So, did he fired for his long and well-documented history of being a creep? Of course not. He was fired for time theft. He got into an argument with his wife and asked one of his employees to come by for emotional support. When the employee pointed out that it was still during the workday and he didn't have the PTO to cut out of a day, the manager told him to claim he was working on a special project and just come over. For the sake of fairness, I should point out that this was probably the last straw for him, and the company was waiting for literally any excuse. But I feel like the long history of being a creeper and the active threat of a lawsuit should have gotten him crap-canned way earlier. Story 23. I worked in a secure building, and we were not allowed to have telephones in the building. A man accidentally brought his in and discovered it. The procedure was that you had to turn it into security at that point for the day, and they would check to see if you've done anything nefarious with your phone. They came and got him and escorted him off the premises. He was terminated. It wasn't because he brought his phone in. It was because his phone showed that he'd been making phone calls while he was at work. They had compared his badge swipes to the phone call times on his phone. Turns out that what he really was doing was calling his wife when he got back to his car, where his phone was. But because it was right around the time that we had changed daylight savings time dates, his phone's clock was using the old dates, and it was an hour early, so it looked like he was making calls during work. After that, anyone who accidentally brought their phone to work just hid it deeper in their bag and never made a peep. I heard that he sued and won, but he never came back. Story 24. Me in the 80s at Wawa. They had this policy where everyone had to work one major holiday. Now, as I recall, the implication was that if you take one of the biggies, I took Thanksgiving afternoon, evening, you were exempt from others. I was a part-timer, and I spoke to the manager well in advance about Christmas and Christmas Eve, and specifically said I'm not going to be available. And anyway, I had done Thanksgiving. I verbally got the confirmation. Well, they put me on. And I told them again, I had just done Thanksgiving, so please take me off. So Christmas rolls around, and they actually even called me at home when I was a no-show. Story 25. I used to work with a very good friend who used to be a manager in the company we worked for. He had stepped down because being a manager was an excuse for the higher-ups to crap on you. Great guy. Our boss was on holiday and left him in charge due to his experience and knowledge. He hated it. So me, being the annoying arsehole that I am, kept calling him boss and mentioning how he was in charge to annoy him. We worked with this stupid git who had little man syndrome and had to be in power. He was in charge. According to him and me, making those jokes to annoy a friend really pissed him off. He screamed in my face and demanded a manager to tell me that he was in charge. We were in the same job position, he wasn't. The manager said this and he took off his uniform and threw it at me, quitting on the spot and screaming how I'll never be the boss. I turned down the management training several times. He knew this and that's why he hated me, because he was never offered it. Story 26. Back before I was going to university, I got a job at a local Tim Hortons during the summer. Told them I was going to be leaving by X date because I was leaving for school. End of summer comes, and I'm scheduled past the day. I said I was headed to another town. Schedule was multiple weeks in advance. They tell me I'm expected to get others to fill my shifts. No one wants to pick up shifts because it's a craptily run Tim Hortons. Give my 2 weeks notice, 2 weeks out because, shocker, I am going to university instead of staying to work in a crafty Tim Hortons. Manager gets pissed and fires me on the spot, literally taking the company shirt off my back and making me go home topless. I'm a guy. Never got my last paycheck, but I did get to go to an excellent BBQ party that I was going to miss because of work. That and the man-child of a manager had to cover even more shifts. So worth it? Story 27. Worked for a small business. The owners had 3 interrelated businesses under one roof. Schedule was MF for 2 of them, and Tuesday through Saturday for the other. Receptionists split duties between one of the MF and the TS and worked MF. The MF business she split time with got absorbed into another business the owner started, and she was no longer needed for it. She was moved full-time to the TS business. This was communicated to her several weeks in advance that it was going to happen, and she said she was fine with it. All of a sudden, when it was time to start the new schedule, she said she refused to work Saturdays. Owner told her it was her new schedule, and she quit without lining anything up. We replaced her within a week with someone much more competent and reliable. According to one of my coworkers that kept in touch with her, it took her months to find a new job, and she had to move back in with her parents. Story 28. I worked retail in college. There was this one guy from before my time whose story was something of a legend. Apparently, he had a huge crush on one of the cute cashiers, so he got a job there so he could hit on her. One day, their lunch breaks lined up, so she went and gave him a BJ in his car. He just left and never clocked back in. He had done what he set out to do. Another that didn't happen while I was in the store, but I heard about it the next day. There was this older guy who worked recovery, basically just being present to deter shoplifters and help customers when they needed it. He was quiet and kept to himself. He walked with a marked limp and nobody knew why. Turns out, he had been stealing frozen food from the freezers that didn't have cameras in them. Dude got busted with a bag of frozen chicken strapped to his nuts. Story 29. My ex-wife quit quite a few jobs in the time I knew her. One time she quit a job because she felt like she got passed over for a promotion. She had been working there just a few months at the time. Another job she was working at had a 5-day work week, but the days off varied. Well, eventually it worked out that one week she was off 2 days and worked 5 in a row. The next week she worked 5 and was off 2. I guess working 10 in a row was just too much for her. Even though I was working industrial maintenance at the time, and maybe got 2 days off a month. She was also pretty mental, so almost any job she had only lasted a few months for one reason or another. Funny enough, after our divorce, she was able to hold a job for several years until a bad car wreck put her on permanent disability. Story 30. Being on their phone. This happened on my first day back to a small company I'd worked for previously. Anyway, this dude was notoriously on his phone all the time from what I understood, and the owner, who is a really nice and understanding guy, was fed up. So he pulls this guy aside to talk about it, and during the conversation he's texting nonstop. I'm getting a job ready and head out in a truck to do an install. Come back later and his car is gone. From what I understand, he spent the entire conversation with the boss, texting his friend and girlfriend, and when asked why he thought it was appropriate while being reprimanded, his response was, "What am I supposed to do, not text back?" He was gone before I finished my first shift back. Story 31. I was working at a small gaming company as a business analyst/test lead. After my first month, my girlfriend's friend, a girl from Singapore, needed a letter of recommendation from someone at a business. I guess it was related to her visa status, but I thought nothing of it and quickly wrote a letter and faxed it as requested. Unfortunately, I left the fax in the machine, and when the boss came back, he found it and slapped it onto my desk as if it was a damning piece of evidence. Turns out, they'd just been fined some huge amount for hiring illegal alien. It didn't matter. I didn't even use the company letterhead. I was fired 5 minutes later. Story 32. My sister died in a car accident on a Sunday, Mother's Day, many years ago. I called into work on Monday to initiate bereavement leave and was told to take the week off. When I arrived back the following week, I was met with my office packed into a box. I was told that because I didn't check in each day to update them, that I had no call, no showed, and abandoned my job. Story 33. Personal one I just remembered, and it's pretty dumb in hindsight. When I was younger, I got a temporary job working in an airport duty-free. It was basically just working in a shop, but it was pretty cool. Getting to go through security every morning, watching all the tourists, checking out the planes, taking off, and all that good stuff. I neglected to mention at the time, I took the job that I actually had my own flights booked for a big family holiday the last 2 weeks of July. Needless to say, when I asked for 2 weeks off in peak season, I got a flat no. Well, it was more of a, "Are you ducking kidding me?" So I didn't have much choice and walked. I kept my head down when I passed through a few weeks later as I set off on holiday. Story 34. A man with decades of experience and a spotless work record began demonstrating violent tendencies. Instead of trying to him, his supervisor showed him the door. Fast forward a few weeks and the guy checked himself into a mental health ward, believing he had developed some form of schizophrenia. It turned out he had developed a functional neurological disorder stemming from a previously unknown mild traumatic brain injury, possibly acquired on the job. When he had completed his initial treatment, he reached out and asked about getting his job back, but was told his true colors had been seen. Fast forward 6 years, and the facility contracted with another to provide training in how to deal with people who have trauma-related issues, and the second facility sent the former employee, who now contacts with them, to teach the class. The best part of the story? I am that guy. Story 35. I don't know if this counts, but Decades ago, I worked for a temp agency. I was told to go to this place and clear out a warehouse space. Another guy from the temp agency is assigned to this site also and shows up in dress shirt and tie. He walks around for a bit and tells the site manager that he needs to go home and change clothes. I'm looking at this crap and thinking, WTF. A couple of hours go by, the guy isn't back yet, and I'm expected to do it all myself. So I just leave and go home. I get a call from the temp agency later that day saying that they can't work with me anymore because I walked off of a job. I don't know what happened with the other guy, but it's the last time I worked with a temp agency, story 36. My first job was at a clothes shop and I was on contracts which were just regularly extended. The day that my contract was due to be renewed, my manager was off sick. Another employee that was training to be a manager took over for the day. I asked her about my contract and what I should do, and she said she wasn't able to redo my contract herself, so I was effectively fired. She immediately asked for my keys and other work-related items, then asked me to leave. My actual manager had already put me on the rota for the following weeks and clearly didn't intend to let me go. So I was suddenly jobless without warning and essentially fired because someone else was sick. I was already thinking about quitting as the job had stupid rules and most of the staff sucked, so I didn't bother trying to return. Story 37. It was me. It was a slammed Friday night and we were doing great. Everything was going smoothly. We had a Suze that was in charge due to the chef being out that night. She came online and took control, sending us into chaos. Without aggression, I asked her to let us handle it. We were better off before. She complied and left the line. The next day, I returned to work to a meeting with the GM and her. I was written up for talking back to a superior. I accepted the punishment, but politely declined to sign the write-up form. Not a legal requirement in that state. "You're fired," she exclaimed. I had worked there for over a year as a respectful and hard-working cook. The GM tried to take it back, but I thanked them and walked out. Story 38. 2010, I was working asset protection for Walmart. I had apprehended a shoplifter and called the police per store policy. Police officer wound up trying to arrest the shoplifter's accomplice on an outstanding warrant. That guy ran, and the police officer took him to the ground on the opposite side of the store. The police officer wasn't faring so well with the guy, so I ran across the store to help him. My supervisor had been trying to get rid of me for some time because she wasn't doing her job well, and I was qualified to fill her position if she was terminated. She wrote me up for running in the store because it was a safety violation. I went to lunch, made a phone call, secured a much better job, and quit Walmart when I got back from my lunch break. Story 39. I used to do a job in energy efficiency where we would contract with utility companies to run programs for their customers to be more energy efficient. My boss was trying to drum up a new contract with this gas utility, and so one of my colleagues was along with him to kind of discuss some of our current programs. One of the things we did was handle the rebate programs if customers installed more efficient equipment, like water heaters and furnaces. It helps offset the higher cost for the more efficient equipment. Story 40. It happened to a lot of people at a company I knew for dissenting with the management. The head of maintenance, himself being a shareholder, was fired over using his expertise to ask the management to make an expensive mistake. Others were fired trying to install a work council and counter the management's policies that were perceived as harmful for the company that these employees had helped build up. Their external IT department was fired because they wouldn't work 24/7 for the same money as they did for 100 man-hours a month. And then the company quadrupled the IT budget, gave all their business data to a competitor's cloud, switched their business platform, trying to become a bigger player, and went bankrupt as soon as the crisis of 2008 hit after messing up their financial structures. Story 41. I used to work at a call center for a home care aid placement service. We had a new employee start one day and not come back for day 2 because some other employees had told a funny story about how they had gone to a bar and gotten mildly drunk and taken some silly photos with some sailors during Fleet Week. Honestly, it was all pretty innocent, and they had had a good time. Nothing bad had happened, and I thought it was a cute story. The new employee was very taken aback that they would have gone out drinking after work on their own time and flirted with strangers and said she wouldn't fit in with our work culture. She just didn't show up at all on day 2. Story 42. We had a large, intimidating-looking mid-20s newly graduated physics PhD hired. He would regularly sleep sitting up in his cube, facing his terminal, snoring. One 8 a.m., we got a call from the local police dep to verify if he was an employee. No other info. We found out later he'd started a fight at a bar, got thrown out, started harassing people leaving, and police were called. Then, he ran from the police, scuffled with them, and spit on an officer after being cuffed. They took him to holding, and he started another fight, where they took him to real jail. On the advice of his attorney, he didn't plea, and spent the next several months somewhere where they didn't appreciate PhDs born in Saudi. We never saw him again. Story 43. Working for a large tech distributor. I had a coworker tell me how happy he was to get a new job and that he was marching into the boss's office to resign. He told the boss the job was much better than this one, and he couldn't wait to leave. That was his last day as they didn't ask for 2 weeks' notice. 2 days later, I saw him back in the boss's office begging for his job back. Apparently, the hiring company said they would be sending him an offer and then change their minds before sending it. He resigned before receiving the signed job offer. The boss told him to take a hike and not ask for a reference. Story 44. I got fired from a Radio Shack for making a cash bank deposit of $73, approximately 12 hours late. I was tasked with closing the store and making the cash deposit. I went to the bank and someone had broken off the key in the night deposit box. I called my manager and he said to just hold on to it and we would deposit it in the morning. So that's what I did. 6 months later, the regional manager is doing a store audit and noticed the discrepancy in the deposit slip. He asked me what happened. I told him. He fired me on the spot. Story 45. In high school, I was a cashier at a car wash. I got fired for doing my calculus homework behind the counter, I guess because the customers would find it intimidating. Also, my sleazy boss's sleazy nephew needed a job. Story 46. I was on break when I worked at McDonald's eating lunch. Dude walks in and tells me we didn't have any McChickens ready, so he put McNuggets on a bun. I look up for second and say, that sounds like a quick way to get fired. He was no longer employed by the next day. His dad comes in to yell about how his son did nothing wrong. By the time he left, his dad was apologizing to us. He did a million other dumb things before this, too. One of the dumbest people I ever met. Story 47. I worked in a supermarket where they were really cautious about sacking people because an ex-employee had sued them for unfair dismissal and won. They alleged that she would take a pastry and then bring it back for it to be marked down when the shop was closing, as that's when they would reduce bakery item. Anyway, camera footage showed that she wasn't doing this at all. She won thousands in damages and got her job back in a different location. Crazy thing is, I would do this all the time when I worked there, compensation for such low pay. Although I stopped after colleagues told me this story, story 48. One of our warehouse managers had a room allotted to storing empty boxes in. He'd reuse the boxes for shipping out orders. He was told repeatedly to clear out the room so it could be used by another department. He refused and made that the hill he was going to die on. We'd been bought by a larger company, and the warehouse manager had a distinctive us vs them attitude. He wasn't alone in his attitude, but he was the most abrasive. It cost him his job. They fired him for insubordination and he lost everything. He'd been there for 17 years. Poof, gone, just because he wouldn't do things their way. Story 49. Got laid off on Christmas Eve and rehired Jan 2 so my employer wouldn't have to pay me holiday pay. I demanded a raise, gave me 25 an hour, then a week later fired me again and rehired me a few days later as a part-timer and gave his addict-addled sibling my full-time manager job. Sibling was completely fried, and I had to train her. So it ended up that with half my original hours, I had to train her and do my job. And after a few weeks, take over all the manager's duties again too. She got paid to Karen about not being allowed to get high. I quit not long after. Story 50. She kept a little container of substances on her keyring. We were federal employees on a state vessel, and for whatever reason, she put her work keys onto her personal keyring. One day, she loses them and reports them missing to the crew. Crew finds the keys, whop off the boat for her. Story 51. I work at a middle school. One of our teachers, who was extremely kind, professional, and hardworking, who always went above and beyond for her students, and who had recently been named Teacher of the Month, was fired on the spot because, due to a school-wide shortage of technology, not enough Chromebook, she allowed a student to complete schoolwork on the teacher's own personal tablet. And the student opened the teacher's photos and saw one of her in a string bikini. The student told other students, and it got back to the principal. Everybody was stunned when she got fired, and even more when we found out it was for such a stupid reason. Story 52. I was a sous chef in a restaurant with a small parking lot. On weekends, employees would park in a lot down the street, and we would shuttle them back and forth. Our best line cook went nuts one day and refused to move his car to the supplemental lot and walked out instead. No buildup, no previous issues. None of us expected it. He came begging for his job back, and I told him to duck off. Story 53. There was a guy who used to work in my office, and all he would do is pester all the women who worked there on Facebook all day. He was eventually let go for taking 3-4-hour lunches and going to the cinema with his partner. The great thing about having someone like that at work, though, is that you look good just by not taking the piss. And if I mess up a deployment and make everyone stay on a call an extra hour, then compare it to the guy who has done no work this year at all and the guy who at least did a deployment. Story 54. I worked in a nursing home for many years. At some point, We had a low census, so management set up a model room to show families what they could expect if their loved ones came to stay with us. Well, 2 people from the overnight shift were caught vaping the devil's lettuce, lounging around, sleeping and boinking each other in that room while they were supposed to be working. IDK if management had suspicions and then added a camera, or if there was always one in that room, but it was caught on camera, and apparently all of management saw the footage. Story 55 worked for a company that told you 3 times during the hiring interview process. They did not pay for the parking garage. However, they did subsidize public transit costs. I can't emphasize enough how very clear they are about the parking garage. Day 1, guy comes in, asks almost immediately about being reimbursed for the garage. Puzzled, a coworker says we don't do that. He starts his training. Apparently, at lunchtime, he goes to our manager and asks. She says you were told multiple times, no. I guess he blew a gasket and she escorted him out. He was there 3.5 hours. Apparently, he really wanted free parking. Story 56. My daughter just got fired because she tapped a coworker's car with her own car in the parking lot and only filed a claim with her insurance company. And the insurance company took over handling the repair of the coworker's car. My daughter never said the words, "I'm sorry," so the boss said he can't have someone in the office who doesn't take responsibility for her actions. For reference, the co-worker's car was a scratched and dinged up SUV that she constantly complained about. She tried to blame a series of long scratches on my daughter, but the height of the scratches was above the height of my daughter's Civic. Story 57. I was once fired for buying a guest a bowl of soup with my own money. I had spaced putting in their order, and they were great tippers, so I knew it was an investment. And my boss said I made a managerial decision without a manager. Story 58. The break schedule was set. Personnel had to be at certain stations at certain times for state compliance reasons. The schedule was set to accommodate those requirements. New guy wanted more breaks to go smoke. He was 2 weeks into the job, was told no by management. Non-smoke vapor-related nicotine sources were acceptable at desk. Dip spitter needed to be a closed-top container if that was the route he wanted to go. Guy chose to call in all his sick days and we never heard from him again. Story 59. Substances delivery where the drivers used company-owned cars. They would come in and be assigned a car for the day. One set of keys went missing. The guy who drove that car last was insistent that he had returned them, refused to go home to search for them because they weren't at home. He'd put them where they belonged. We needed to stop asking him because he had not lost the keys. Finally agreed to go home and search if he stayed on the clock the entire time he was gone. Fine. Came back an hour later, handed over the keys, and quit out of embarrassment. Story 60. This was 1996. I had a severely ingrown toenail and should not have been on my feet. I called in because of this and the fact that I had to walk to work and back. It was excruciating, but I was also in an abusive relationship. My partner locked me out of the house and I had to walk to someone with a phone who could help me. District manager was off and lived in the neighborhood. She saw me walking, truthfully limping, down the street and called my store to have them fire me. What a crafty day that was. Story 61. I got fired from a bar one time because the owner lost a piece of paper. He asked me to look for it, so I looked all over looking for a piece of paper. I couldn't find it anywhere. Long story short, it was under his chair. Dude was nearly 400 labes, so I couldn't see it past his fat ass. He ended up finding it. He verbally abused me for a moment and told me to get the duck out of his bar. Story 62. Worked security at a hospital. One of the supervisors had been fired from a previous job for dealing steroids. I knew about it since his former work world was in the same area as my previous job. After the supervisor called me trash in front of my coworkers and continued harassing me with other negative talk, I mentioned that he had been written up in the papers, never said for what, but they looked it up and found out. I was fired because I created a hostile work environment for him. Pretty ridiculous since he was the substances dealer working in a hospital. Story 63. Company I worked for implemented lean manufacturing. This was about 20 years ago and I'd call it a great success. Anyway, they have a company meeting, about 60 people, and they start to explain everything. They say some people may lose their job, but nobody should lose their employment with us, meaning you may get reassigned. Then they ask, is anyone not interested in participating in these changes? And this woman raised her hand. Let go on the spot in front of everyone with a quick, thank you for your service. We'll get your final check ready right now. Story 64. I was in a dumb situation where I essentially was forced to work or quit. Pizza store owner demanded that we delivered pizza in a hurricane, all while the county had a mandatory evacuation. He swore we would get a lot of business since everyone else would be closed. I told him I'm going out of the county inland to be safe and to help my family prepare for the oncoming hurricane. Duck you, Rich. I'm glad they shut down your stores. Story 65. I've seen a bunch quit because they didn't get the first week of deer season off. I'm like, dude, blast one on your way home. But nope, they would quit a great job to deer hunt and then have to find another job after. Story 66. 2 examples, and both involve company cafeterias with good-paying union jobs. 1, my coworker was going into the closed cafeteria in second shift and stealing a can of G-fruit juice every night. Was caught by the guard on his way out. 2, 2 of our maintenance people were sneaking into the cafeteria and stealing a block of cheese and loaf of bread. The cafeteria workers noticed it kept going missing, so security watched the cameras. These dudes were taking it out behind the maintenance shack and making grilled cheese sandwiches. Story 67. I worked at a doctor's office as an admin, but it's a really big network of doctors. So the admin role was basically just answering calls, like a call center. A small group of us started at the same time, so we went through training together. One guy seemed to get everything so easily and worked very quickly, so I was a bit self-conscious that I was working way too slowly. Turns out he was just answering calls and immediately hanging up as if he had lost the connection. So his numbers looked really amazing, but he was doing absolutely nothing. Story 68. In college working for minimum wage, standing behind a counter to read in punch card decks from students for classes. 9 p.m. Friday night, monsoon storms and AZ knockout power, and mainframe dies. All the students leave, and the rest of my team leaves for their dinner break. Long week of classes and work for me. My shift is over at 11, and there's nothing to do. I find a chair and sit behind the counter. My boss's boss walks by and boom! This was 50 years ago, and I still think he was a complete banana. Story 69. I worked at your typical tech company with all the on-site perks, free snacks, gym, etc., and we were paid pretty well. I don't think anyone made under $100K in salary, except maybe the receptionist. One person was fired for stealing the snacks. Like not just taking more than their share, but like caught on camera stuffing all of the chips, candy bars, etc. into a backpack and leaving. They were actually given a verbal warning and then did it again. This person lost a cushy $100K plus job with great benefits over $100 worth of junk food. Story 70. Started at a corporate job almost 20 years ago. There were about 20 of us to start at the same time, and we had an orientation. When we were finished with that, we were taken on a tour of the offices. We get to one of the elevators, and one of the other new hires turns to someone else who was not with our group and says, "Ladies first," and gestures into the elevator. Well, that lady was our CEO, and his name was Steve. That new hire didn't even make it onto the elevator that day.